Impact. It's your host, SP, and we have Nev, the man behind the blue wall. Please like, follow, and subscribe. We have a lot of information coming up, and it's going to be dope. Today we have our guests, Mary and Max. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Doing well,
Thank
thank you.
you.
Good,
Appreciate you having
good.
us on.
Yes, thank you, SB, for having us.
Thank you. So, let's just tell the people a little something about yourselves. Mary?
Sure. So, as my name is Mary. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist, providing individuals, couples, and family therapy, specializing in grief and trauma. So, I always like to describe grief and trauma because it's big words.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to explain grief being the loss and death of someone or something, trauma being the abrupt, unexpected, sudden loss or death of a person, place, or thing, causing emotional, physical disturbance. A lot of words, but I always like to describe that, the big T trauma, there's always something called a small T transition, which is any change, move, COVID, protest, racism, transition, relationship issues, job loss, job change. These are all transitions that causes emotional, physical disturbance. So my job is to bring people to normal, meaningful productivity. And I always like to describe it as the doctors giving you the best medicine for whatever illness you might go through. And my best medicine is to help you to gain back control of life. So that's what I'm here for.
Dope. And Max?
So, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I focus on working with military law enforcement with mind body utilization for trauma, because I want to help people connect and recognize that the mind and body can work together, and that's when we become more efficient and we are able to be our full selves. Our mind protects us. It's the mature adult reason, logic, and rationale. Our bodies are like children. They will say and express exactly what's going on, but it's making those two work together is what I want to help people do.
That's dope. Uh, I use dope a lot. I can't help it.
Nice.
That's all right.
All good.
Be you.
Like it.
No, not the drugs. We mean fly.
Yeah.
Boom.
Like boom.
um, so where, Mary, where are you from, and how does it impact the work you do today?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So I'm born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. Yes, and my family, mother's from Hong Kong, my dad's from Taisan, China. So my dad had came here when he was 16 years old, very young. So we got the American way, and we were raised here in Brooklyn, New York. Never moved, same place until later on in life. Moved to Jersey. As far as how it impact me as an Asian American, I think I always describe myself as very family oriented. I'm very Asian, in the family oriented, ethical, cultural ways, and I want to. I'm very proud of that, and I want to keep that going. And as a Asian American, I think it really. Growing up was a different life for me, or for everyone who's an Asian or Asian American. It really there's a difference between the two, I guess, and I guess growing up in this place where we often have to help out in the family, which it has in other cultures as well. But in addition, in our culture, it's always like in working, productivity, keep going, keep doing, keep helping. So, I grew up with the helping profession, and I really enjoy just helping my community, the Asian community, and just at large, and just supporting, learning my Asian language. When I was growing up, my siblings, they did not want to go to Chinese school, but I went to Chinese school, and luckily I spoke Chinese at home, so that was so helpful. So I think it really helped me to um, sort of be a model for the Asian community and just kind of keep growing as we learn from each other. Yeah.
And Max, where are you from? And
So,
how did it affect the way you do your job now?
I'm adopted, so I came from South Korea, and my younger brother came with me. So being adopted, it was quite interesting because I went from living in a very poor, impoverished area. My mother had to work in a clothing store, and I basically had very little. You know, the Sally Struthers thing of, oh, this person only eats one bowl of rice a day. I can actually relate to that directly. And then I come to America and I get adopted by two loving parents who are giving me all the opportunities, people that don't get these opportunities who live in the US. And so going to a different culture, having had lost my biological father who died in an accident when I was about 4 or 5, then losing my culture and coming to a new area, I had to adapt. Couple that with having been born with a seizure disorder, which impacted my ability to really have friends because unfortunately with seizures, if you have an elevated sense of emotion, including euphoria, that could trigger seizure. So these things made me become very introspective, think about what works in maintaining balance. And that in a way has driven me to teach others how to regulate your emotions through self-awareness, through again the mind-body connection, recognizing what does your body recognize, what is the trigger, what is it you want to do, but what might happen, so you ultimately use the best tools to have a quality of life, whether that's peace, whether that's feeling euphoric, whether that's feeling anxious. Some people enjoy that, but I want to teach people to know is despite all of these difficulties we may come up with, if we tap into the right supports, the resources that are in front of us, we can have the quality of life we want.
So social work, um what prompted you to pick this particular field as a profession?
So SP, social work is a field that back then was a voluntary field, and so I never really knew what that really was until I went into in college when I had a professor who I was having like some mixed thoughts on whether I wanted to go into business, where oftentimes, in our culture, we own restaurants, we build businesses, become doctors, lawyers, the big things. And I went to Baruch College for accounting or finances, but I'm just not a numbers type of person. It might be a little bit boring for me, or it's just not my type of thing. I ended up graduating with a bachelor in psychology in Baruch College, which is a business school. If you know, Baruch College is a CUNY school in New York. But throughout my my studies over there, I had this really awesome professor who described me as the glue of the family. A glue of the family will stick together all the pieces of the family and sort of make it workable. And I always say that it's not about good or bad, right or wrong, it's about what works. So I think coming into this field, I was trying to find something that really worked. Doing a lot of volunteer work in the hospitals during the times of college. Working in the inpatient psychiatric hospital helped me to get to this field. Volunteering in early intervention back in the days was also very helpful. But I also recall that it's very hard to volunteer in an inpatient psychiatry ward because of confidentiality. So I was very lucky to actually see the field and really open up. And eventually it just grew me into the master's program, and I applied for certain programs that really valued diversity. So I went to NYU for master's in clinical social worker, master's in clinical social worker specialty in mental health. So these were really helpful to kind of take a look at that. It's a field that we don't really look at, although it really needs to be opened up. And as an Asian woman or Asian American, this is very limited, and it's a stigma. So I think growing up to be in this field, it was very helpful that I continue to follow that love due to the professor's continued empowerment. So I really thank her for that.
So for me, I actually was the standard typical Asian of doing engineering. I was going to go for engineering with ceramics and material sciences, identifying tensile properties, making things stronger. But then I took my first elective that I had to in psychology, and it seemed fascinating how the mind adapts, how seems to keep evolving, changing. Even as we grow older, they said that neuroplasticity stopped. Later on, they find it actually keeps going until you're dead. So that curiosity was more interesting than engineering. So I decided, all right, let me go into this field further, see how I can help other people who seem to be able to do things, yet their mind slows their ability to do so. I looked at veterans. For some reason, I have a lot of friends, family members that were not my personal family members, but relatives that were veterans. And something that seemed very common was they would come back. You'd hear the stories about the veterans coming from war in Vietnam, and you hear about shell shock, all these things, World War II. What is the reason they didn't have the support? And my parents, they were my first big advocates. They really advocated for me when the school system said, oh no, he's going to be disabled for the rest of his life, let him go on disability. And they said they want something better. So that really perpetuated my desire to advocate for others.
Max, question. Sorry,
Yes,
real
sir.
quick. I just wanted to know. I'm curious now because I don't think I know this. We know each other personally, obviously. Um, your parents, are they Asian or are
No,
they
they're
of a different
Caucasian.
background?
My mother
Okay,
is from a Polish background, and my father is from a Jewish background.
okay. Interesting. All right, I didn't know that. Fun fact.
So, um, was there any pushback or um, negative feedback from your family when you decided to go in this direction as a career?
So for me, SP, it was it's that type of thing where since I was 17 years old, I wanted to be a psychotherapist in private practice, and it was a real space that I really want to get into. I think growing into the field, it was that type of field where it's like it's sort of weird. It's like, what do? You talk to people about what? It's kind of like, about what, and from my understanding,
And you get
so
paid for that?
yeah, you get paid. Well, I mean, for what? Like, it's kind of like, why don't they just talk to me? That type of thing. And I know that I had an uncle who, when he knew that I went into mental health, and he actually owns a restaurant. So, he, coming into mental health, he said, "Oh, you might become mentally ill if that, if you get into the mental ill field, and you have to be careful, Mary." Like, and it was a very, you gotta be careful. Like, it was a very lecture, So it was that type of thing where although it wasn't a support to get into mental health, although I'm a very persistent, and I'm very naturally supporting in that natural environment. So in a way, I thought, why not just get paid to help people doing something that you love the most? And I guess maybe the pushback was there, but I think the heart and the passion was really even stronger for me, especially because I couldn't stand alive to do something that oh my goodness, that I just cannot do. Like, that's just not okay. So in a way, the pushback was for sure there. And even in the culture, I'm very lucky I went to NYU, because diversity is very important there. And I'm lucky that they accepted me, because it's diversity is they're looking for more Asians, right? And um yeah, going there, it's very clinical, and I like clinical, and I want to learn more. So I think throughout throughout the years, even now, there's still that talk about what is this, like, you're talking, and it's not the same as if you're a plumber. You could fix the house, you could show me the house. It's not the same. You can't see the results really. So yes, there's pushback, but I think as we persevere, we find what we really love, and we shall keep going.
Mary, I'm jealous here. I always wanted to go to NYU. myself. You know, that was always a dream of mine, and I'm congratulations with that. How do you think NYU? Because like you have the villagey area, right? And you talk about diversity. How do you think when it relates to, I guess, person in center, right, or centered person in their setting? How do you think NYU as the backdrop played a role in diversity and everything like
Oh, as a backdrop,
that, and being
uh,
in the village and things like that in the city?
hmm. Well, I think the diversity is very very important in that area. I mean, as you probably know, St. Mark's Place was there. Japanese world is there, and there's Korean world on the 32nd Street, and then there's the LGBT around the area as well. And I think as a backdrop, I actually saw it as a positive, like a sort of a like a not a backdrop, but the opposite of a backdrop. For some reason, I'm just looking at it more that it really brought about a more vibrant area. Although I don't know the inner politics of everything, but what I do know is that they do have a lot of you know, like groups involved in NYU, like Asian groups or probably other cultural groups as well, because I did join it and I was also part of the Asian. I co-chaired the the Asian American mentoring program um, about a couple years ago, and that was focused towards the Asian mentoring program. It's kind of like who are Asians and want to, we would mentor them to become, helping professionals. So I felt that they were very like encouraging of diversity, and they really looked into that. There was always events. At least I attended it. I was the school of
Right.
social work.
And that area has like Cafe Wa. I mean, it's historical. You know, you have all of like the little small cafes and the um, music venues and everything. It's just a very rich arts and culture part of the city. So that's why, it was always a place that I went to shop, to go to shows, and then I was like, I have to go to school here, man. This is really awesome.
Oh,
So I was
wow.
just curious what that was like for
Yeah, oh, it was very lively, lovely, outside, always, so beautiful. I mean, it was just very lively for me. Our campus was right by the corner, right by the Washington Park. So it felt safe. Although sometimes when we went into the train, it was a little bit dangerous. There are things that happen in the train even before the pandemic, things like that. I would come home late from the gym, things like that. Sometimes we had to just, look out.
you.
Yeah.
Cool. And Max, you have a
So I no, actually, I never got any pushback that I can recall. It was interesting because even growing up, I ended up becoming kind of a big brother to a friend of mine. Now we become very close. His family had passed, and then growing up as a young teenager, I somehow got in a position where I saved someone's life. Then during college, my freshman year, I ended up having someone who was also in emotional distress come to me. So throughout my life, people have, gravitated towards me. So it just seemed natural. And I hear people who find out, oh, I'm a therapist. They're like, I knew you would be one. I just was wondering when. So the answer is no. I've never actually gotten any pushback.
So, Mary, do you find that there is do y'all find there's a stigma in the Asian community regarding mental health? I know in my community there's a big stigma for mental health, well earned, but there is one there. Um, in the Asian community, is that as prevalent?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with the Asian community, it's that type of thing where it's been so much, so much improved. We don't use the word better because it's as though it wasn't good enough before. With the CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, we would say it's definitely more improved at this moment, and that there's been a lot more education out there, and people are speaking out, talking about it more. Preventative care is out there, more funding into it, so absolutely a lot more improved. Although as far as the stigma, back in China, I when you walk past the hospital, the mental health hospital, it's sort of like a superstition that you will actually get mental illness. It's sort of like what the uncle had said. Like if you go into this mental health field, be careful, you might get mentally ill, or something to that extent.
Like it
Yeah,
would
so
rub off on you or something? Like it
like
rubs off on you in proximity?
yeah, absolutely. Like
That
just because
movie,
of
The
the
Fallen.
yeah, I mean, just because you pass by, you might just have a touch of it somehow. So just kind of be careful, that type of thing. So absolutely, as far as stigma, there is, and I know that working in the Asian psych unit, like it's an inpatient psychiatric unit in Bellevue Hospital. So Bellevue Hospital, if you all know, it's built in 1736, very well known hospital for psychiatric inpatient unit, as especially. And in the Asian unit, everything is all Chinese, Chinese food, Chinese therapists, like everything Asian, Filipino nurses. And over there, we really practice culturally competent care. And there, I recall that oftentimes I would change it into psychoeducation. So give them paper of education, and that's going to be useful versus if I talk, it's like as though I'm better than them. That wouldn't work.
And Max, I know you deal majorly with veterans and the police force.
Mhm.
Um, is there a stigma for mental health in that department, especially considering the don't show weakness aspect of being in the military and being an officer?
It's interesting because there's also an overlap with the whole Asian culture of the collective. Having progress and being productive is valued. It's not about the individual. So it's always about the collective. And if you're not able to perform, to provide, to do, then that brings shame. And so there's a very big similarity with the military. You're supposed to be an army of one, all this tough. You're supposed to be able to, and that's what you hear a lot. You're supposed to be able to. So when you can't, when anything is seen as a stigma of you're not suddenly able to protect me, there's a lot of shame. Or you're considered broken. I've heard a lot, I'm broken. And it's really painful to hear because we're not broken. We're simply growing stronger. And this is where, if you are seen as you have an illness, then you're basically going to be shunned by either the family because you can't provide, and now our honor is looked bad. Or if you're talking about law enforcement and military, you're considered unreliable.
So now both of you are in private practice. What are some of the pros and cons of running your own business and being your own boss?
Wow. Yeah, SP, thank you for that question. That's a loaded question. Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, having our own business, as I said, since 17 years old, my dream for private practice, right? And having that dream is all about working for yourself, doing what you can, like working your hours, whatever you want to do, like everything all good. Just taking care of whatever is within your heart. So it's always really great to be able to set your own schedule and just do things as perfectly as you like to, and really have your own ethical, sort of like how do you say that? It's kind of like building up something authentically from you, from kind of from scratch, but we don't reinvent any wheels because we do have to follow with the social regulation and HIPAA, of course, HIPAA policies as well. There's a lot of things to follow, but I just really enjoy the creativity of it. Even in the practice, you put a lot. It's almost like you're putting a soup together and putting it together to help a client make it personalized. So I love that so much, to just be able to see a client and not make it a regimen where it's by the textbook, everything by the textbook, right? So everything is just really like lovely, like just creative, and my favorite word is authenticity, and just making it so authentic from the heart, and just being with them, like just being there. That's all. The best part of being self-employed, right? Yeah. And then there's nothing over you to bother you, to do this, do that, just so much more freeing. But then, of course, on the other side, we don't use the word but, because then that's going to negate what I just said. So we use the word and. So, the other flip side of it would look like sort of just, yeah, having a lot of things to manage, you be your own boss of your own, overhead, taking care of the overhead, taking care of the billing. Is this person taken care of? Is the other person, or is the family happy? Are they happy? Or, are these paperwork good? Am I all good with the CEU credits? Because we have to have CEU credits, ongoing training yearly, and licensing. Oh my goodness, it's gonna expire. My birthday's coming up in couple of days and it's gonna expire, so I gotta make sure I pay for that, like all these things to keep up with while you're trying to be the best therapist ever for your client, but at the same time, dealing with insurance, and oh no, billing, and oh, money, don't touch money. So there's a lot of things to really think about. So I think overall that would be the drawback, but I really, I think there's more greatness than there is drawbacks. Yeah.
I'd have to agree with everything Mary said.
Mhm.
The freedom to really explore and make change the way you see as important. When you work for someone else or an agency, you're following their mandate, their protocols, even if it may not be the most beneficial. It's just how things are done. And I want to kind of change the bell curve, if you will,
Mm.
to use what works versus what the system says has to be done. And if you work for an Article 31 clinic, there are certain regulations that they want very cookie cutter, cut and dry. But as a private practitioner, you get to be more creative with the client. And I never have to say now, oh, we can't do this approach because it's not evidence based. I like to focus on what works for the individual, person centered. There's always the flip side of wondering, what else will I deal with as a private practitioner? I worked in mental health uh, insurance, actually, to understand, what, as a practitioner, am I going to deal with? Prior authorization, headache, claim denials, what types of OMH regulations that are going to shape the landscape, and how it would bleed into commercial insurance. So that gave me an idea of, all right, this is what I'm going to do to navigate around it. But I did not expect the amount of administrative stuff that I said, oh, I'm in private practice, I'm just going to do the clinical part. I'm just going to provide therapy, do assessment, evaluations, and counseling. And I'm going to do away with all the paperwork. That doesn't really exist. So it's learning to balance and say, all right, what is going to make me feel rewarded? How much paperwork is really necessary for me to provide the quality of care? So finding that balance for you as the individual practitioner is important for really longevity, and so you don't burn out.
So was it everything you thought it would be?
A little more than everything.
Cool. Um, so I want to talk about some of the clinical stuff. Um, can you kind of explain what is PTSD? Um, and how would someone know and be able to identify the symptoms if they're suffering from it?
So PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it's actually diagnosed. It's under the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is created by psychologists, I believe, psychiatrists, social workers, and nurse practitioners. And it is a cluster of symptoms that have to come together for you to fit the criteria. So it's not just one symptom. Think of it as maybe a medical condition. If your stomach hurts, just because your stomach hurts doesn't mean you have cancer. There would need to be, for example, I believe, high RBC red blood cell count for possible other
Mhm.
conditions. And so some of the clusters are easily startled response, hypervigilance, hyperarousal. You
Mhm.
might have flashbacks. You would have significant alterations in mood. So people may seem like they're bipolar. And that's
Mhm.
often misdiagnosed for children because they are behaving very erratically, which is normal for individuals with PTSD. They're given either bipolar or ADD, ADHD. It's looking at it from the criteria A, which is the individual must be exposed to a life altering or a life threatening event. It doesn't have to
Mhm.
be them. It could be they find out about someone who died or who has a severe illness or injury. It could be that you are the one in either a firefight or you were abused as a child. So, as a result of those traumas, whether it's a singular event or if it's a compounding lifelong history of events, then
Mhm.
you will notice people are going to become hypervigilant. They'll look around corners, they'll listen for things. They might even start walking around corners. So
Mhm.
that's a lot. It's one of the actually easiest ways to tell, there might be some trauma, severe trauma going on. Then you look for the easily startled response. If you hear something fall, the average person, they might pause. But someone who has PTSD, they're more likely to freeze, their body tense up, and really, really concentrate to see what type of threat it is. Then
Mhm.
you look at seeing if they also might have dissociation. Do they remember what was going on, or did they disappear? Flashbacks, very common. You hear about it all the
Mhm.
time, where they think they're in Nam or whatever. And sometimes people have night terrors. So they
Mhm.
might have reoccurrence of those events playing through their nightmares. They wake up sweating and they're sometimes not sure why. So if you're noticing a cluster of those symptoms, then yeah, it would probably be a good idea to get assessed. And we have something called the CAPS, and it's the Clinician Assessment for PTSD Screening. And it's about a 90-minute questionnaire that takes a look at what trauma or traumas occurred and how all the symptoms are manifesting. How much do they impact your quality of life, your functioning, your personal, your interpersonal, your vocational, social, and
Mhm.
activities of daily living. We also have a shorter version called the PCL-5, Post Traumatic Checklist, and it's the version 5. So it's 20 questions. And if you score at a certain level, then it is likely that, yeah, you probably do have PTSD and do get seen by a counselor to determine if it's worth investigating further.
And Mary, what are some of the different types of psychological traumas you can describe and kind of best identify for the audience?
Sure. Yeah. Well, trauma, I just wanted to add, like with trauma, the normal everyday life, everyone will, experience some sort of trauma. And, when I described it as the big T trauma and small T
Mhm.
transitions, like, big trauma sometimes is too big of a word. So we call it the small T transition, which is any
Mhm.
change and, change, disturbance, in abruptly, suddenly, that causes emotional and physical disturbance.
Mhm.
As a
Adjustment
world,
disorders,
uh,
adjustment disorder. I mean, like adjustment
just
issues.
yeah, like, having changes, adjustment disorder. But as a worldview, we have COVID. That's a trauma for a lot of people, right? Like that as a whole worldview for 2 years, it's been such a difficult stage for everyone.
Mhm.
So sometimes, like Max had described, like adjustment, but PTSD is kind of like more deep, where, like for us to prevent PTSD, we need to see a therapist or a psychiatrist before it's too late to kind of like support it not getting to that level of PTSD, because PTSD, you're
Mhm.
really sort of out of it, or just like in this place where with the re-experiencing flashback that Max had mentioned. But adjustment disorder, as Neville had mentioned, is more like a adjustment period. It's a period of time where hopefully it's a short period of time that it'll get better, so it doesn't get worse to the PTSD level. As far as like the different types of trauma, there's also did you mean by like events that cause a trauma?
I mean, like acute trauma, chronic trauma, complex trauma.
Got it, got it. Yes. So I mean, definitely there's with PTSD, definitely there's the acute trauma that you mentioned, and those are more like very short period of time, that it's very abrupt and it just came right away. There's also the chronic trauma that you mentioned, where it's long term, long driven, um, continuation of um, sort of like a disturbance. There's complex childhood trauma from when you grew up, when people had went through sexual abuse, emotional, physical abuse, like similar to what when you see ACS, children's services, you often see a lot of that. um, and did I miss anything, Max? I think
No,
there's
I think you covered it. I know that there's also vicarious trauma as it
yes,
relates to people who are
secondary.
in mental health or in healthcare as a whole. It doesn't
Hmm.
just affect people who provide mental health services. Anybody who provides human compassion, even volunteers, you can get vicarious trauma by being exposed to such emotionally, taxing events. Look at the doctor who worked in the ER who during the height of COVID, she became very susceptible to, and she
In
was
New York.
suicidal. Yeah, she killed herself because it was so much. And that's because of the complex trauma she was experiencing.
Yeah, I just want to add with the vicarious trauma, it's that type of thing where there in the world that we live in, there are actually places for debriefing, or what do they call it, respite, for caregivers who are
Mhm.
having so much difficulties caring for their loved ones, or basically trauma from being a caregiver too, because they have to deal with this secondhand. And sometimes coming from the hospice care world, I was a social worker, medical social worker for hospice care. So
Mhm.
that's death and dying. So death and dying, sometimes it sounds so bad, it sounds so like terrible, but it's really a beautiful ending stages of life. It's supposed to be comfort care, and in comfort care, like I mean, how much comfort could it be when people are really like dying and it's their last stages of life? So what we offer people respite, so that the caregivers can just really get some rest while their loved one is being taken care of, and just having comfort care themselves. So I think nurturing those traumatic feelings from every sides of the angle will build a team that's the most workable. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a hospice nurse before I became a psych nurse. So
Wow.
I've yeah,
You're very familiar with all of this.
yeah.
Oh wow.
So can you kind of explain the difference between vicarious trauma and collective trauma? Let's start with Max this time.
Okay, if you can hear me. So, vicarious trauma is usually the result of working with individuals who have experienced trauma, hearing it over and over. Usually, people who are treating individuals or supporting individuals that have been through human trafficking, war. They hear such traumatizing or, really distressing stories over and over that it kind of affects their own psyche. And it works on the individual, whereas collective trauma is where it affects an entire group of people. So let's say, for example, minorities. It creates that social trauma of you can't trust the system, and that entire collective, whether it's the blacks, whether it's the Hispanics, whether it's the LGBTQIA community, they end up all being traumatized, thinking about, okay, what's going to happen to me? They become fearful. So it's not just one person, which may be vicarious trauma, because that one person is working with them. But for collective, it is the entire group that is affected in the same way.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, Max answered it all. In terms of vicarious trauma, like the way you think of it is that definitely a secondary trauma of a person, right? And then the word collective would mean like a collective society, and just everyone. Like for example, in our topic that we talk about today, where as a whole, uh, we collectively, the Asians, are collectively having some difficult times at this moment, and as well as the Black communities and different people who are going through different things. So that would be a societal type of trauma, and everyone comes together as a collective whole to kind of work on that trauma together.
So let's talk about childhood trauma. A lot of people just look at childhood trauma as um, there has to be some kind of abuse for there to be childhood trauma. Um, I often think about they were cleaning one of the horse's hooves, and the horse bucked, and since it was tied to he kept bucking, and he was tied to the fence and ended up strangling himself, and we saw that. That was a type of trauma. I think people get confused about they always connect trauma to abuse and not necessarily outside forces. So can you kind of explain childhood trauma?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely, SP. Childhood trauma, that is that type of thing where like you were saying, like physical force. It sounds like mostly it's like a physical force, things like that, but it really refers to a very scary, right? Like anything that's scary, dangerous, violent, or life-threatening event. That happens to a child, right? Like anything, just because it may not seem dangerous or scary to someone else doesn't mean that it's not scary to the child or whoever experienced it firsthand. Even witnessing domestic violence in the home, or witnessing something that is unusual in the home, that could be childhood trauma. And as a result, seeing or hearing about the other person being hurt or injured, like that would kind of cause them to feel sort of distress. There's internal pain, and it sort of lasts into continue mental and physical effects that will last a lifetime. Like you would see, like oftentimes we would call it, in life we would have adaptive skills, right? Like sometimes, like maybe the child would adapt to just staying quiet, just because that's what worked for them, that was adaptive in the past, so they just don't talk about it and avoid it, and it worked, right? Like it worked in the past for them. But then as they grow up, it may become maladaptive, because they'll hold all the disturbance in their heart, and then that's going to be maladaptive, and they don't really talk about it. So that childhood trauma is within their heart, and it's just kind of pushing them down, and it might exert in behavioral ways of, like, hitting, hurting, you know um, screaming, yelling, or just all the terrible disturbance that you hear, that happens in the news, or different things that happen. um, Unless it's being seen earlier, it's something that can be very, you know very severe moving forward. So I think childhood trauma is like the having the preventative care from the get-go is most important, and seeing that every little thing really does matter. So the kid is not just like being oppositional. They're not just like being behavioral. Perhaps let's look at, have we asked them like what happened in their life, or what happened this weekend? Like what, oh, someone yelled at me, and they said I was fat, or they said I was smelly, or they said I should do this or do that. Like all these are childhood trauma that will, come across with them for the rest of their life, and that's what we call trauma. That's still trauma, even though it's not physical. Sometimes words are even hurts more than like physical. What's that saying where rocks don't hurt as much as words?
Sticks and stones might
Yes,
break
yeah,
my bones, but words will never hurt me. But that is
yes,
not true at all.
never
Words
true.
have power too.
Yeah. Yeah, words are so strong, and that's the speech of things are so important. Yeah, so that could be trauma. So I hope that answers your questions, SB. That there's so many types of like trauma, and it gets very deep into adulthood, and oftentimes I like to say that you know um you know you're no longer, the shoes that you used to wear, they no longer fit you, like because now they don't fit you anymore. And now we have choices in life, right? And that's in adulthood, right? But imagine like if we were to be able to instill something in the children earlier, that would be so beautiful, you know yeah.
Yeah, I would like to add that, anything that impacts the growth of an individual could be considered trauma, but it's more related to a sense of safety of emotion, sense of physical safety. So neglect, for example, that can be traumatic, not knowing when am I going to get what I need to survive, food. I know I've had a couple of clients, and I've known several people where that's what they grew up in, not knowing when is mother and father, when are they coming back? Am I going to be alone? Am I going to be safe? So then having that emotional toll comes so early, when childhood development indicates that there should be certain milestones where we get to learn to explore, where we get to learn to make friends, we can feel safe, we have someone to protect us. If those core developmental milestones are not met, then there's a likelihood that the individual's construct or schema as they grow up is going to be a little bit different than how those who did have a, you know, stable household wouldn't experience. So they might end up feeling shame. They might end up feeling guilt. If I had done this, then my parents would have stayed together, and so on and so forth. So that type of behavior translates into our adult behaviors, as Mary had very well said. And unfortunately, that's what their fixed schema becomes. And it's teaching them to realize and help them process, explore that trauma, and realize they don't need to take ownership as a child, that they did not cause the situation.
Mm.
And by helping them be free of that guilt, then you can help them create the new world as it is and it can be for them. But if you notice that a child is not getting their emotional or physical needs met, then there's likelihood that they're going to develop into adult trauma behaviors and responses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to add, SP, that I mean, Max said it so well in terms of childhood trauma, where there's neglect. There's also like not being seen or heard, because oftentimes as a child, they have to do what parents may say, like but we also want them to know that they have a voice, and having a parent figure deny your reality, and just being told directly or indirectly that you shouldn't feel this way. Like, why do you feel sad? Like, why do you feel like, why you shouldn't have to feel, why are you feeling this way, right? And that would sort of kind of deny them the ability to just be real, and touch reality, right? We always say like reality based, and that means like being in touch with reality, that it's okay to be angry. If you're angry, you're angry, and we need to express it. And having a parent figure that focus on appearance a lot. Oh, why you so you know fat, or why didn't you do this, or why didn't you do that? Or in the Asian world, you hear a lot about tiger momming. And the tiger moms are very into making sure that you do everything perfectly, and just making sure that you're in the right space. But that often causes them to have difficulties in the future, thinking that they're not good enough, and then having a parent figure who can't regulate their own emotions. And oftentimes I hear children say that, like, I never know when mom's going to be upset with me, so I just rather stay in my room. It's probably just easier, right? Or having a parent figure who doesn't model proper boundaries. That could also be very difficult, because children really need structure. And being in the YAI community, which is a national for people with disabilities. So that these are is an organization that came out at 1891, and these are for like people with disability. One thing I never forget, I learned from there is that you really have to set up structures for the child. And as a psychotherapist working with such cases, I really got the opportunity to really see that even with like normal children, it's very difficult. And imagine with people with disability, how much more difficult it might be, and without the parents' support, it's so hard. So I think all in all, with that trauma, it would include that the parents will model the best thing for the child to prevent any trauma, or it's the cycle repeat itself. So we want to pick that up with the parents. That's why when we see children or adolescent, I always have like 15 minutes at the very beginning of the month, the last 15 minutes of the session, to see the family, because we need the family involved to make this work.
Yeah, I grew up with a mom who attended church regularly, and on Sundays we went to church, and people would catch the Holy Ghost and start speaking in tongues and falling out on the floor, and it horrified me. And my mom to this day could not figure out why every Saturday I'd find somewhere to go stay the night because I didn't want to go to church.
Oh no.
So
Oh,
when you when you
oh.
have those kind of dynamics, what are some of the tools people can use that they can do themselves to cope with these and other forms of trauma?
Got that. Wow. Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that, SP. Oh, that, and then I think like just hearing that you don't want to go to church. It's like church is such a safe haven. It's supposed to be something really safe for you, and unfortunately you experienced something different. I'm so sorry
Well,
to hear that. I,
as a 6-year old, seeing adults
I know.
falling out on the floor and kicking and screaming and hollering, it's maybe not for every child, but for me, it was traumatic.
Oh my goodness, of course. Yeah. Oh
My
my goodness.
sisters loved it, but me, I was like, oh, I'll never come back here.
Oh my goodness, I got you. Oh my goodness. I'm glad you could laugh about it, SP now. That's really part of healing and discovery, SP, when you can laugh and smile about it now. And as far as like the tools, definitely, if you were a 6-year old, if we were to provide you with these tools, maybe it might have been helpful, but it was also such a traumatic event, so I'm pretty sure it was hard. And actually, in terms of the tools, SP, laughing is actually one of them. Yeah, like laughing as in like, really sort of like laughing at how interesting that was, or and I know that that's easy said than done, right? Like to, at the moment as a child, like how could you just laugh at that? That was just really a little bit off, right? For sure. And sometimes we try to gear our senses to something else, where I always remember this very wise psychiatrist who always said, hey, if you SP have a panic attack, have a panic attack. What that means is like, if you have that feeling, right? Have that feeling, because you don't want to fight the fight of the fight, because you're already feeling it anyway. So you can't pretend you're not feeling it. And if you do pretend you're not feeling it, it really defeats the purpose of my favorite word, authenticity, of just being you and just being real to yourself at the moment. And then later really thinking about it, like, wait a minute, why am I like feeling this way again? Like, oh, that was nothing. Like just sort of like really having that self talk can be helpful as well. Everyone has their own tools that works best for them, but I also know with children it really helps them to at the moment to look at, like, let's say if they have I'm thinking by your church, if you have a rug that's colorful on the floor. Was there any rugs or carpets colorful that you could focus on?
Oh, the church was
Beautiful.
beautiful. It
Yeah.
was. I
Like,
think it was just growing up in a household that was so quiet most of
yeah,
the time, and
sure.
being so young, and to see that amount of energy, and people falling out and the screaming and the hollering, and you're like, what is going on?
I got that. Yeah, exactly. What is going on? Yeah, I just asked SP if there was anything. I'm sure, like, absolutely, that the church is so beautiful. Where sometimes some of the tools are to like really find up something so beautiful and focus on it. Like, like how beautiful that that the orange color of the wall is, right? Or like the yellow in the carpet, or how nicely that thing is angled, right? So those are some of the tools when you're at the moment, for children, adolescent, for adults as well. There's also that other type of thing where at the moment, deep breathing, that's like the best thing ever, where if you're at a moment of space, nobody has to know that you're just like closing your eyes just for a moment, even if you're like working, right? And you're on a little break, you close your eyes and like really, like really, you know deep breathe like 3 times, thinking about the nice ocean, Hawaii, blue waters, like at the moment, just really like be okay, be with it, be in Hawaii, your favorite place, just for a moment. And that's just brings you like such spirit, and of course there's other things like validating your experience, which is what I said about the psychiatrist saying that if you have a panic attack, have a panic attack. If you worry, as Pete, worry. If you're frightful, be frightful, right? And then really think about it, why you're having that, right? And then there's also that type of thing where you could think positively for 12 seconds to really take a look at, like, what can I stay focused on for 12 seconds, because it's just like a easier space to be in, right? And you at least can calculate it with your hands, like 12 seconds, and just being in a positive space. And then I think I would say the last one, last of many, is the five senses. I know Neville has this really greatness about the five senses. What I often tell people is, like, just using the five senses of like seeing something out, like looking at the clock ticking, but that sounds a little bit creepy, right? Like if you look at the clock ticking, but that's using your senses of a eye to look at something. Also using your ears to hear the whatever's outside, the birds chirping, tasting soup, really tasting it, feeling the nice dog, like, things like that, or smelling the nice coffee. Having a little bit distraction here and there can be helpful. Yeah. I know, Max, that was a lot. And I know Neville.
No,
Neville likes to ask. Neville likes to say actually the five senses in this other way. Did you want to add that? You like to say the five something, the three something, two something.
Oh
Neville.
yeah, it's sorry, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's basically a centering technique. I wasn't sure if Max was gonna go, but it's a centering technique, a grounding technique, is what it is. So it's basically the first five things that you. Oh gosh, can I do it off top now? The five things that you see, hear, smell, taste. Is that what it is? Here I am now, out of order. Uh oh,
Maybe I could.
I wasn't ready.
well, the
Aw,
question is, does it have to be in order, or can it be if it works, right?
That's deep.
I like that.
Yes, true, true. That's true.
There are certain formulas, and Mary had given a really good grounding, mindfulness, meditative technique of, and this is used for people who also dissociate. And this isn't always for people who dissociate every time, because touch actually may elicit and trigger them. But if you're, for example, stressed out and you're at your desk, or if you're in the kitchen, hold something that may be innocuous and focus on the physical sensation, the curvature, the temperature, anything that'll help you be present, be here. Like, for example, going SP to your situation at the church. As an adult, I might encourage you, as Mary had said, humor. Humor is very, very healthy. It is so healing. It ends up releasing a lot of positive emotions and neurochemicals. So that in itself will replace the anxiety. We can't seem to have both at the same time at the same microsecond. So by introducing something that provides a positive physiological experience, it automatically displaces that negative thought. So you might think about looking at maybe the cross, or looking at a pew, looking at the design and focusing on all the intricacies. Because what that will do is that will activate the frontal part of the brain, which helps regulate and provides reasoning, understanding, so that you're no longer becoming reactive to whatever stimuli you're having, but you're able to ground, be here. For children, if you notice a child may start getting dysregulated, you can have them use the same technique, or you can have them start using their imagination. What did you like about the church? Not specifically that one interaction, but what other positive things can they associate with church? And what you were talking about, coming from a household that was very quiet to suddenly an environment that is very loud and rambunctious, it's shocking, because you're used to, your mind has, as growing up and even as we become adults, used to certain environments. And so when we're suddenly thrown into a different environment, change is very, very problematic for people. You know, you try to change one thing in someone's life, and they've been existing that way for so long, they're going to have to feel safe with that new thing. So if you're coming from two different radical environments, then helping them associate first safety. What feels good about that situation? Because church can be a place of healing, it can be a place of gathering. But, you know, as a child, hearing people screaming and stuff like that, we associate with danger, yelling, screaming. So I'm just piggybacking on what Mary had said.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
let me get back into my professional bag for a minute here. I was eating, so I wasn't exactly 100% here. But yeah, you can do the simple grounding exercise. So this is good for grounding, helps with anxiety, anger, and focus. So what I normally do with clients is I make them count from 10 to 1, like what Mary was saying, count them down 10, 9, 8, 7, so forth, and you lower your voice. And when they're done with the counting, you do the simple grounding exercise. And in the office or wherever your setting is, or if they're at home virtually, you say, name for me 5 things that you see around you. And they name the items. And it's 4 things you feel, but not emotions, physical feelings. So the sensation of like a pillow on your back, couch under you, floor under your feet. 3 things you hear, mommy. 2 things you smell, and then 1 things you taste. And usually that takes them to like that usually takes them like 5-10 minutes, where it can help center them and ground them to, person in room and in place, and not mind racing or focused on the traumatic situation, but be more present and centered and grounded. So that's the exercise, grounding
Hmm.
techniques.
Wow.
And I do, if it's okay, want to actually make sure people understand about breathing, how important it is, if I could.
Yeah. Please.
Yes,
So
yes, yes.
we hear about, oh, just breathe. But what a lot of people don't seem to understand is we're actually not really taught and conditioned to breathe correctly, deep breathing. And so the majority of the people, even now, I'd ask you to determine, do you know if you're breathing on your upper chest area or in your belly? And very few people usually find that they're breathing in their belly. The reason this is important is the way our body is actually designed. The lungs are narrow up at the top and they become wide at the bottom. The area, that surface area, is where the alveoli are. Those are the air sacs that pull in the oxygen. So if we're only breathing up here, we're literally suffocating ourselves because we're not getting the full oxygen. So learning to breathe deeply is very, very important, because you can say to somebody, breathe, but they hyperventilate because they're only breathing shallow and short up here. So instead, they may associate breathing with anxiety. But if you teach somebody how to correctly breathe from the beginning, then it can change your mind and body together. So I do encourage people to recognize, are you breathing shallow or are you breathing deep? And if you're breathing shallow, okay, let's take a minute. And what does it feel like when you breathe deep? Push out the belly. And if you feel that sensation, you're doing it right. Because then you will notice a difference in how you feel physically.
It helps regulate the body, brings oxygen to the mind, slow down the heartbeat. All these things help.
Mhm.
Sorry, Mary.
Absolutely. Oh, I just wanted to add, yeah, definitely the breathing. Thank you, Max, for that. Because, yeah, with the breathing, it just reminds me of control for some reason. And I know when I described about gaining back control of life, I mentioned that the doctors give you the best medicine to gain back control of life. Actually, SP gives that, right? You're the nurse, and and for us, we the therapists, our best medicine is to help people to gain back control of life. So sometimes at that moment, another tool is just like having you, the person, you, the small SP, to reclaim control of life at the moment. Acknowledge the trauma, like what is that? Like similar to the psychiatrist who said, if you have a panic attack, have a panic attack. It's the same similar thought, but you're really acknowledging the crazy noise and what that actually reminds you of. And I really like what Max said, because it really reminds you of danger and unsafe situation. And so knowing that, then wait, hold on, but this is church, and this is this is a safe place. And you know what, let me go speak to my mom, or let me speak to like the pastor, or like different spaces at the moment, or just taking care of your own needs first, instead of having to make everyone happy at the moment. I'm sure when you were in the church area, you were probably thinking like, oh no, they're probably thinking if something's happening to me. Were you thinking that, or were you kind of like, you just wanted to leave? SP.
For me, I just wanted to leave,
Yeah.
mostly because they weren't discriminative of where they fell or who they fell on or where they threw themselves.
Oh my God.
So you may end up with a lap full of old people and you don't know what is going on.
Oh my goodness.
You
Oh
don't
my goodness.
understand what the Holy Ghost is, and you don't
Wow.
understand what speaking in tongues is, and you're like, where are they from and why are they falling on me? That's
Oh, oh
you think
boy.
they're sick, you don't know what's going on around you. And even if you are raised in the church as we were at such a young age, that can be traumatic.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you were around all these older folks, and you didn't really know how to be yourself. Yeah. And so oftentimes it would be like being patient with yourself too, SP. Being patient with yourself at the moment of whatever you're going through, and just being fully present, at the moment, can be helpful. But I know that your red alert is like, oh no, like I'm unsafe. And that's the best way, is to really seek support of someone who's closest to you, not the other so many people, not the other bunch of people. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, SP.
Oh no, hey, if I could save one kid from having to having to have Miss Jenkins land in their lap and a wig fall off,
Oh,
it'll save the world.
oh, absolutely. If you could just help one person, that's
Holy Ghost PTSD.
yes,
We-
absolutely. I got you.
so okay, normally when we talk about race-based trauma. We're talking about Black people and people of color. Um, I understand the Black people part. Can't help it. What is what is Asian? What can you define to us Asian hate crimes, and can you give us some samples of it occurring?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a big one. Yeah, and just as you had mentioned, SP, that your thoughts of or your side of things, and for me, as an Asian American, I would say I know, but I don't know, like, in that sense. But at the same time, I think I told Neville, I was a little bit nervous to talk about this, in the sense that with my authenticity, talking about it, where most of us are very about talking about this, and it's about being in the right mind to really be free with this topic, where Asian hate crimes, is a crime that's specific to the Asian culture, and I'm sure, like, on the blacks also have their own, like, every, yeah, there's differences, and for the Asian hates, it's that type of thing where people get spit on. They I hear, even my, the people I work with, they have experience, or their family have experienced a shopping cart pushed over to them. They have experienced racial slurs walking, or spit at, or spit in a open door window, or break the window, or even the recent events of a Asian woman being killed and stabbed in her apartment in Chinatown, next to the supermarket that we go shopping at all the time, right? And this woman was also taking a Uber home. So it's very disturbing news that it's right next door, and not even right next door to us, but within our heart, because that's where we always shop, right? Like, and it's that train station all the time that we always go to. There's also Asian hate, of you know um, people being pushed down the stairways. The grandma who was pushed down, and unfortunately, went to the hospital and later died, and it was so sad, because the parents, the son was taking the mom to the doctor's appointment in Chinatown, which I do all the time, right? And going down the stairs, and being pushed down for no reason, no apparent reason, to the doctor's office. And if you can imagine, it's a doctor's office for health, but then get pushed down in the public transportation and later died. This is very disturbing, very, very, very disturbing. And and again, this is in our community, and this is what we hear. So ongoingly for the past year. There's also being told to go back to China, told that, hey, do you speak English? Or there's also the more deeper levels of microaggression, like, just saying things that are may seem very normal. Hey, did you eat rice today? And that's kind of like very normal, right, type of thing. But to some, it would mean like, what are you trying to say? I don't eat anything else but rice, or you must be good at math. And notice I said that I hate math, in the very beginning, like, meaning to say that there are some things that are kind of stereotyped, and then it became a little bit more deeper, where people's name, I hear it all the time as growing up, that, oh, ching chang ching, or like, you get the name from throwing a coin on the floor, right? Like, we hear this all the time growing up. And there's always concerns about, from parents, like, how to how to help their children in the community now, because this may be happening outside. Do we talk about it? Do we not talk about it? And in our world, we would say, like, we do have to be real, right? Reality based, right? We have to be real and really talk about it with the children too. Yeah. And then, of course, having it reality based, but in a, a a proper way. So similarly to how when COVID started happening, there were more education on what is COVID, why do we have to stay at home, why do we have to have masks. So all these things are added into the I guess the Asian hate, and sort of having more education on um, what's happening, or a more voice has been helpful. Yeah.
And Max,
No, I think Mary encompassed it all really well. I mean, all I can do is throw in little tidbits here and there. The
mhm,
general definition of a hate crime being a act of hostility and aggression toward any group specifically because of them belonging to that group of characteristics, whether it's race, gender, sex, or ethnicity. So in terms of what Asians are experiencing, unfortunately, I think a lot of that is had been fueled by politics, frankly. We saw the last POTUS, and they are a big name. When you're the president of the United States or of a country, you kind of represent the whole people, and you normalize certain behaviors. So to utilize race as a attacking venue to kind of propel his own status, that divided the country even more. So that created collective trauma. Because then people said, oh my God, the leaders are saying it's okay to be racist towards any group. It could be blacks, it could be, blue Smurfs. But then that whole group is going to say, if the system is suddenly saying it's okay to hate me, then what's going to happen? And now people are getting closer to possible complex and more severe types of trauma.
so
Well, let me say something, SP. Sorry.
yeah,
Um, when it comes to like even the talk that went out, right? Like the China virus, that like was not that did not help, right? The China virus, the Wuhan
Mhm,
virus, and then
mhm,
about even like the violence that happened with the Asian woman being pushed in front of the train, the model being beaten. I don't remember exactly when that happened. Where a lot of it is in New York, though.
a
This
couple months
happened.
ago, New York, 34th
Yes,
Street. Yeah.
yes. Like these situations, I think. How do you think like it affects the Asian community with going outside, feeling, I guess safe or under attack, or even what you said, Mary. We talked offline when you said people boycotting businesses and things like that based on your culture. Like, how do you think that affects
Mhm.
people?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a big question. I mean, the impact has been huge. I mean, let's start with, I mean, COVID started, right? And COVID started, and the business went down, and though Chinatown was having difficulties with their business, and there's been a lot of support to those business in Chinatown. And then, with the Asian hate, and then absolute the Chinese virus had really, really caused a even like that was the toll of even more worser to the Chinese business in Chinatown, or in the world, let's say. But I think in terms of the impact on the Chinese people, going outside, it's also the Asian people, which includes the Chinese, and includes people from Thailand, Korea, adapted folks, like or interracial, Philippine, all different types of Asian, where
Japan.
Oh yeah, Japan, absolutely, Vietnamese, all everyone was impacted. Always recall having all these calls during Asian hate, and how much it was impactful for them was unbelievable to me, especially like 15 minutes, like as an emergency grief counselor, seeing so many calls in like one day. I mean, I probably had like over 30 in a couple of hours, and all different types of people, even if you were half white and half Asian. So I think the impact on the people going into a store, even if you're Filipino, and being told like, hey, you should go back to China, but wait, I don't actually, I'm not from China, and I'm also American. So things like that, and just hearing that, like, let's say by the pool, hearing someone say like, hey, there's no room to play here, to my son, right? That would sound a little bit like, oh, like, at first you would laugh about it, but then later you're like, wait, hold on, wait, what did that mean again? So meaning to say that there are a lot of things where wherever you go, you don't really know what is happening, and you always have to watch your back. But especially in New York City, we take the train all the time, or at least we had the train all the time in New York City, and that is the main source of everything. It's our life. The train is our life for many of our people, especially they work in the restaurant 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, in factories. So they're all, this is their main, that's their life, that's their string, that's everything to them. So having all these happen in the train station has been a huge impact, and it has made people afraid to go to work, or restaurants close down because of it. So huge, I can go on and on Neville, but huge impact, yeah, unfortunately.
I just have one question because you were talking about before vicarious trauma, right? Like, how do you, as a practitioner, and as well you, Max, how do you maintain balance and keep yourself healthy with all of this, hearing all of this when you went through that for a year, year and a half, and I'm sure it's still going on now. It's probably tapering off a little bit though. How do you process this and really like stay healthy so that you can be there for them,
Mhm. Max,
clients?
Okay.
yeah, you can go, Max. I'll go
Yeah,
right back
she's
to
like, this is
you.
how it's healthy. Set a boundary, Max. Go.
Yeah,
This is
Max knows
good.
how
That's
to, like,
good.
he like,
Yeah.
wow. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
she's like,
Max.
Max, you share this. Come on.
Yes, go.
So, so no, these are very important questions because it could apply to any group, right? Neville, it could apply to you. It could apply to even in any individual who feel they belong to a certain minority and they work with that
I just shut
community.
off the TV. I burned the television. I'm done.
Mhm.
Revolution will not be televised. No, I'm joking.
Well, I mean, one of the first things I do, and I encourage everybody, therapists and clients, just everybody, first and foremost, we are all human. And if we can acknowledge, empathize with how they're feeling, then it brings us closer together. It might heighten your sense of right and wrong, compassion, desire to advocate. But if we do that, then we break down the barriers of someone against me versus you know, I think Bruce Lee said, under these heavens, we're all one family. And so how is this relevant to what you're asking is that this person is going through trauma. Okay, they are afraid for themselves. How, as a person, is this going to impact them? How is it going to impact me? Knowing that, hey, as a human being, like Mary had said, sometimes being with that emotion and letting it stay there lets you know this is part of the human condition, but it doesn't stay. It doesn't have to be permanent. Also, as a practitioner, know that this is not yours. This is the client's stuff. And can you have a healthy enough boundary to recognize this is what the client's bringing to me. This is my countertransference. And this is just the countertransference. However, this is not what the client needs. So focusing on what's going on, grounding yourself, being mindful. I'm in therapy with my client. My client is going through distress. So this is what's going on, and using what you've learned in school, separating a little bit. The academic, the textbooks, they're there for a reason. They encourage you to recognize when you're having certain emotions, put yourself in check. Okay, I am having heightened emotions, but my client is in distress. This is what they're experiencing. This is what's going on in the community. So how can I help anybody take away? This is where we see them as human. Take away their group affiliation, but as a human being, what might allow them to feel safe, feel whole again? And if you're able to recognize that, you're also human. So how could you apply that to yourself? You know, break down all these barriers, all these cultural and even biological constructs that we've created, and just connect as an individual. Then bond with them, but let them take ownership of their emotions. They're not for us to bear. We are there with them, but we're not there to take them on. We're there to help the clients feel comfortable with the human condition. And if you can remind yourself that's what you're doing, then you separate and keep yourself from the buffer of trauma.
Mhm. I like that, Max. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I mean, Max really said it all. I know the question, Neville, was vicarious trauma and how we can take care of ourselves for it. And when Max said we are human beings, because I know I always love to say that it's not what you do, what you have. Is who you be as a person, which means human being. So, it's important to focus on who you be as a person. So when it comes to like your self-care and just being with yourself and just like knowing that the job is the job, but in the end, you have your own life too. Balancing the work life is so important. I know that SP's question about like self-employed versus pros and cons and things like that. And sometimes when you work for yourself, sometimes it's hard to draw the line sometimes with the structures of what is too much, what is too little. We have great peer supervision to really work on that and it just sort of be accountability partners to each other to, to really recheck ourselves. So that could be a very good way to cope with vicarious trauma, to just meet with like-minded people who are looking to grow and to succeed and are determined, but at the same time have your own hobby, right? Like just knowing I know that Neville's very big on hip hop dancing. I mean hip hop, the music, and you too, SP, which I love so much. I'm also a crazy hip hop person, which uh, at the same time, I know it doesn't seem like it, but at the same time, the music is that type of thing. Like quietly is such a loving thing, and it just reminds me of all the students that I have. They sometimes you see that they're very like smart, like very intelligent people who are just like looking at the books and making sure that they do great. And on the other side, when you talk about hobbies, they lit up like everything's like so like bright. And that's the same thing for us, right? Like we are human beings, and I always remember that people say that we're not public servants, and that was very hard to really get that, because as a helping profession, the hat is always there no matter what. Like you're always holding the hat, and I think I hear some people say that when you're walking around and you just think like, wait, I'm a friend, not a therapist. Wait, hold on, I'm a coworker. I'm not a therapist. So you have to really weigh the hats and put the boundaries. I think Max is the boundary guy, so he knows how to like set things straight. I think that's something of course I had to really really learn more and more with my own practice. Seeking social support, which is with Max and Neville, they've been a great support. And just not taking responsibility of the patient, because oftentimes we think that, oh, the patient did this, and oh, if only I did that, then
Over
maybe
involved. You
yeah.
get over involved sometimes. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Over involved, and just doing for them, that's something that you just can't do for them, because they have to wait till their own time, and we have to just be there, for them whenever they're ready, right? And then also I love, but I don't like that we have to take CEU credits every year, because it is a requirement, right? We have to take it to keep our license, which is all, like it's good. It's good because I love to learn. Like I love to keep learning, and every day we're learning more and more. So that's something helpful as well to kind of keep us grounded.
But it's
Yeah,
mandated, is what you're not. You're against the mandated part of it.
a little bit, a little bit, but I love it still. So there's so much things. But I think all in all, it's about just, instead of mandated, what's the opposite word of mandate? Instead of
Voluntary.
oh, voluntarily, like taking care of yourself, and just knowing that you're a human being too, and you have your own things that you want to take care of first for yourself, so that you can better serve your client. And the whole thing is that you can better serve your client, and that's the mission, to better serve them, since this is our vision to help the community at large. Yeah.
I'm gonna say this before. Sorry, SP. I want to say something before, just for myself. I think with self care that I've learned, and this was earlier about going into your own practice. I'd have to say that it's helped me as far as being a person of right, person of color who is black. Mom is Asian, grandma's Asian, cousins, uncles, whatever, Asian as well. I have a ton of so. I'm the half. Well, I'm like Nas said. I'm the half. I'm the Afrocentric Asian, half man, half amazing. Um, I don't look like that when I'm on the street. People don't go, "Hey, this that Chinese guy or this that Asian guy." They don't say that, but I do walk around with that. I'd have to say that getting into private practice allowed me to embrace that side of myself more. I felt like I wasn't allowed in public spaces to be as Asian as I wanted to be until I had that private space and I decorated it myself. And then I didn't have all the microaggressions being put on me in my office. And then I was in a position of power. And it's weird that it took in my 30s for me to be like, dude, you can embrace this. You should embrace this. This is you. Do not deny yourself, regardless of what the public says. And a part of me pushed that out because I felt like it wasn't accepted and I rejected it myself. Where I think SP, we spoke to somebody, I think it was OC, and he said I wanted to like hide or feel ashamed that I have a two-parent home. That's not the cool thing. Or nobody did a bid around me. But there was a part of me that was ashamed of it because it felt like, well, you're not black enough, or you're not, for the cause, or you're half caste, like we said before, joking, and mixed. And I think that developing my own space and my own practice and being the ruler of my own destiny, as far as economically, it allowed me to have the permission and space to embrace that. So that's been healthy for me. I bring that up now to bring this point up. Um, the way that I guess I take care of myself through this entire thing is I'm trying to embrace all these sides and understand all these sides with Asian hate, Black Lives Matter, the passing of these recent laws that are going on. There's conflicts inside of me. The Asian side is conflicted with the black side. The black side is conflicted with the Asian side because of the conflicts that are taking and happening on externally. I'm also battling with them internally. So with that backdrop, I guess SP number 14 and 15, that's where we are
So, part of the problem is, Neville, you're in the United States, and
now. That are
it doesn't matter.
disunited,
It doesn't
that are
matter
ununited.
how much Asian you have. You're walking around. You're black. That's what they're going to see, and they're going to treat you accordingly. So, I mean, it just is what it is. Um, Knowing that, um, there has been kind of a backlash within the Asian community. The Asian community's been receiving in regards to the passing of the Asian hate crimes bill, mostly because I guess, just speaking as a woman in the South, because I'm from Texas, they've been passing this anti-lynching bill since the 60s,
Well,
and trying to, and they've always told us progress takes time, everything is slow, it happens when it happens. And then you see, bam, you got an anti-Asian hate crime bill passed less than a month.
Mm.
So do you think that that has that has um some of the it's part of the impetus
resentment.
towards the the violence that we're seeing towards the Asian community?
Hmm. SP. Yeah. uh, Thank you for a load of questions. And I mean, that's a Big load. Yeah, no. I mean, thank you for asking it. I know it's something that we need to talk about, right? Um, I think this is a really it's a tough
It's tough
thing. Yeah,
because
it's
it's tough because um we've I've lived in a community, and the grocery store that um we all went to from the time I was a kid was Wahings.
wow.
Wahings was a family. They owned a grocery store in the neighborhood. But even during the depression, they only sold, they were a convenience store at first. But during the depression, the grandmother and grandfather started bringing in meat so that the neighborhood could have fresh meat. They've always lived in the neighborhood. They've always been a part of our neighborhood. Um, so it had baffled me at first when I saw the uptake in Asian hate crime. But then after I started talking to people, I saw the correlation and why um, certain things were happening in certain places that weren't happening, right in our general vicinity. So I think it is a topic that we have to talk about, especially now that we have someone of every race. And we can, because we have to bridge these gaps because we're kind of all in the same boat, you know. And I think some of it is most of it is not self imposed, but it has been imposed upon us, and now we bear the brunt.
Yeah, I got that. Wow. No, I can totally understand your experience and experience of many. Yeah, SP. I think that this is a very difficult one because I think I tend to have a, I guess I want to say, positive mind that the way I look at it is that we have to start something somewhere. And in somewhat ways, perhaps maybe we start this bill to start something rolling, and perhaps we since the Asian hate, there was organization coming together, there's more connections, there's more voice, there's more like support, and then starting that kind of like kind of like piggybacked or string along the other things that are happening later. But I can understand why it could seem like, wow, it's been a while, and how that, I mean, that's a big controversy as well. I guess like in my thoughts of things is that there's a lot of things that we can't answer, and a lot of people's life and childhood trauma, they can't answer that either. And unfortunately, it's like, how do I find peace in my life of what happened in the past, or why is this happening to us, like vicariously versus collectively, as Max and SP, you had mentioned. Sometimes we try to find the conclusion, or have peace in our heart. Sometimes you have to have your own peace in your heart of what you bring it to be. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but it really means, like, people say that after all these happen, especially in the emergency grief world, they say after these things happen, whatever it is happen, like, people really learn to appreciate their own life so much more after the fact. But why wait till after the fact to appreciate life? But at the same time, like, no buts, right? We say and at the same time, but there are stuff stopping us. There are barriers that are, like in our Asian community, in the corporate world. You know, how come I don't get a raise? How come they get a raise? How come I get so much good feedback, but I never get a promotion? Like, what's going on with that? But I always get the best grades, right? Like, and I don't get that. So what's going on with that? So there's a lot of quiet things that are happening outside. So it's an ongoing process, but the more we educate, the more we talk about it, the more we allyship. You know, allyship really is, the word allyship means like we connect together. I learn about you, you learn about me. It's about, instead of responding right away to what I just said, like really understand and active listen to what I really just said. Like, you know, like really hear my side, and then I really hear your side, SP. You know, like, yeah, I'm really getting it. And it starts somewhere, and it starts with you. SP, yeah, and you, SP Neville. I mean, for even bringing this topic about, is already a big deal. Like bringing education to community, bringing validation, normalization, and bringing it to importance. So thank you guys. You know, yeah.
Max.
I think you guys covered everything. You know,
Okay.
I really don't have much to add.
Yeah, I'm just, I think it's looking at each other's humanity and not seeing someone who's fighting against you, and maybe working towards a similar goal, and finding a way to support each other will
Thanks.
go a long way, um, to
And not
curing a
being
lot of the animosity that is not of our own making. It has been pressed upon us in a society, especially over the years and in throughout history, a society that likes to divide and conquer.
Mhm.
That's very well
Absolutely.
said. Sorry. Do you want to go, Neville?
um man, no, that she just threw me off with that. That was amazing. I just want to say boom. No, Max, you can go, and then I'll figure out what I was saying.
No,
That
I
was
mean,
awesome, SP.
you're right, SP, because what's happening is people are being very polarized. You know, the information that is being given is us versus them versus everyone working together. As you'd said, and as we've been discussing all night, we're human first. We all want similar experiences. We want to be able to love. We want to be able to laugh, feel safe, enjoy, feel a full stomach. These are all similar human experiences. So if we can start to recognize they're my family, just because you're of a different color, you're still family. How can we help the family? That's when we become a collective that works to the greater good. But if we still have this mentality of, oh, it's an isolated incident, or if it doesn't affect us, then we simply keep sustaining these walls. You know, the last time we had a severe medical breakthrough, a real big medical breakthrough, was the polio vaccine. And the sad part is, we really don't have many permanent changes of healthcare regulations unless someone political is injured, or if a child's life is in danger and has, been lost. Timothy law. Back, I forget, I think it was around 2006 or 2003. It took New York State the death of an adolescent for them to pass what is called parity, unlimited treatment for mental health based on medical necessity. An insurance company denied it. A teenager who was suicidal ended up killing himself because he couldn't get help. And that's when we made the laws. So, unfortunately, the leadership government is very slow. They're slower than they should be, which is why you hear arguments, let's slim down the government. They're ineffective. But as a people, knowing that, we know we have each other to utilize as supports. So if we can start thinking that way, then it brings us together. You're invested in me, you care about me, so I want to care about you too. So I'm hoping maybe this message goes out to somebody who says, yeah, why don't we just start working together? Problem shared is a problem halved. I don't have to deal with it all on my own. You don't have to deal with it all on your own. I've got your back.
Oh, I think I got the part that I remember now. It's I was saying that people need to be less dismissive, right, of others and active, and like what Mary said, be active listening, and bear witness as well. And whether or not you fully understand it or agree with it, at least give it space and listen to it. And I think that a lot of times, pre-pandemic, people wrote things off, but then when we became still and bombarded with this stuff to the point where it even became sensationalized, I think then everybody had to address it and say, well, there are disparities in how frontline workers, essential workers are affected by the pandemic, the housing issue, the voting rights, the storm on Washington, D.C., right? Like now most recently, Max, what you said, we should probably touch on is Ukrainian, right, and Russian war now. And now it's like after we've been through all of this, for this is damn near, it's about, we're approaching the 2 year mark of being shut down, right? Since the initial lockdown. Here we are now facing this now. It's a people fighting against their own quote unquote people, basically, over land, money, resources. And it's like, how are we doing this after everything that we've been through and seen worldwide? It's pretty interesting. Like it makes me wonder. I have hope for the future, but it does make me wonder, how come human behavior, as mental health therapists, what we do, why is human behavior so hard to change for some people? Narcissists, etc., etc.
Well, the thing is especially with the in Ukraine, it just never ends because then again racism rears its ugly head, and you find out that people of color aren't allowed to get on the trains that are evacuating the cities. So one thing that seems to ring true no matter where you are in the country, racism seems to find a happy place everywhere.
Oh, in the world, you mean? Like in the world?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but um we're not going to be able to fix racism in this conversation. But what we can do is expand knowledge, and something that's very near and dear to my heart because I grew up in San Antonio. We had 5 military bases. We have an abundance of retired veterans. Um, how are veterans affected by PTSD directly and indirectly in this country?
I mean, it's just not veterans, but people as a whole. It impacts them directly through their ability to connect with friends, family, their ability to maintain jobs, homes. I know several veterans who lost their home, even though the government had stepped in, I don't know, maybe a decade ago, said no veteran will lose their home. They're also finding that they're not able to maintain jobs, so they can't keep their car. They're not sure how they're going to be able to afford. So this is where you hear about a lot of homeless vets. They have tools. They are experts in the military side that there are equivalent civilian jobs, yet we're not doing enough to provide them with mental health well-being so they can have that strength back to function. So then it impacts their family. So now their family are experiencing mental health issues. It affects their children. So their children are having poor performance in school or social interactions. So it's quite the ripple effect. And it costs the government, which they know, billions and billions of dollars, when these are people who have the strength, have the ability, if we reinvest in them the way they invested in us. So they've lost their homes, they've lost their marriages, they've lost their jobs, they've lost pretty much sense of self. They don't know who they are. But none of that has to happen. So it always confuses me.
Yeah, well, having dealt with the VA for many, many, many years as both a hospice nurse, a wound care nurse, and a
Wow.
psychiatric nurse,
Oh my goodness. Wow. You've
the
been done it all.
the red tape is abundant. Even even as even with hospice, and you're dealing with the last stages of life, and we have to fill out 17 different papers in order to get what people need or the equipment that they need.
Mm-hmm.
um, so a lot of that has to do with um, they, their processes are archaic. um, their thought processes when it comes to outside care is archaic. um, and nobody seems to want to focus on the real necessities. They just think if you throw enough money at it, it should fix itself.
Mhm. Good intentions, poorly thought out. I remember the waiting of veterans in Arizona. I believe it was headline news a couple years ago, where veterans were waiting to get treatment and died waiting. They've also done the catch 22. It's interesting you brought up the provider situation, where they said, okay, there aren't enough providers in the VA, so now you can go see outside doctors and outside mental health professionals. But at the same time, they put barriers to have mental health professionals actually be able to service veterans. So they're doing really a bait and switch and a catch 22 at the same time. I had a veteran who said that he was actually scared to go to the VA because one time he almost died from an operation. So he actually said he won't go to the VA anymore because he's afraid they're going to kill him. You know, it's bureaucracy where it's not needed. Figure out
Exactly.
what is it you're trying to do? What is the ultimate goal? Then focus on simplifying the process so you always remember this is what we want. We want health and wellness. Or if for the government's sake, they want to save money. So what is going to feed the system? Having someone who is able bodied, who is able to work, blah, blah, blah. You not only benefit what they want, their agenda is to save money, but you also care about those people who have invested in us. The reason all of us, the four of us here, have this opportunity is because there's somebody who is willing to stand up and say, just in case your life is in danger, I'm here to protect these liberties. So the fact that we throw these people away after we're finished with them is quite disgusting because it does indicate how we treat human lives. You know, the fact I can sit here comfortably is because there is somebody who's volunteered, and I believe we're the only voluntary military in the world saying, you know what, I care about your well being enough that I'll put myself out there.
So what can we do as just regular citizens? I know we volunteer and we do little things. They may be big things in the grand scheme of things, but what can we do as just regular citizens in order to help and support our veterans?
I'm going to chip in just briefly because I do want to hear from Mary. First thing I encourage everybody to do is call them people. Instead of thinking of them as veterans, find out what is their name. Is it Chuck? Is it Dave? And treat them just as another civilian, because once we start labeling individuals, then we have our preconceived notions that come out when we interact with them. So if we say, oh, you're a Marine, so there are there's the stigma, jarhead, or whatever you want to call the derogatory terms, and they must be tough. And that's the identification you've given them suddenly. So now they're seen as a veteran. But if you treat them as a human, as Chuck, hey, what's going on? And tell me about how you're feeling, then you value them as a human and not just as an object given by the government. So that's, if nothing else, I would encourage you to start seeing them as a person and not as a veteran. See them for who they are, not what they did.
Wow. Well, thank you, Max. Yeah, see them for who they are. Yeah. I mean, wow. It's interesting, Max, that you say that, because that's a really eye opener for me. I thought the opposite way, because I think it's a matter of everyone's perspective, that there's so many different spaces, and it really opened my eyes to, like, in somewhat ways, would it be considered stereotype, where I thought that we should really encourage them as, like, veterans, like to empower, like, them to be called veterans. I thought, and I'm wondering if this would be sort of like a, is it a stereotype that this is seen this way? Like on my end, I'm just looking at this where
Well, it's the way that we have as a world and just in the healthcare field, th- compartmentalization and categorizing allows us to make sense of things. But what ends up happening is by calling someone a veteran, that can cause something called moral injury. Moral injury is the concept that they were sent off to do something which is for the good of the whole, yet it goes against their values as a human. So they might be in Afghanistan, Iraq, and in America, we don't think about, from the normal bell curve, kids shooting at us and having to shoot children. But
mm,
when other nations are using children as soldiers, that concept of having to do something, shoot a woman, shoot somebody, or engage in a behavior that goes against how we were raised, that can really shape and make veterans question their own worth as a person. So that's the,
oh,
in a nutshell, the concept of
mhm,
moral injury. So by saying, "Hey, I appreciate," or "Thank you for your service,"
mm,
I've heard many of them say, "What do you think I did?"
oh,
So it confuses them and they get angry because then they identify veteran as doing something they really didn't want to, and it brings up that idea of moral injury. So
mm,
I would encourage you to have the dialogue first and ask them to talk about their experiences. You don't even have to say, "Hey, were you in the war?" You can just say, "Hey, tell me what's going on." If they bring it up, let them be the one to, be vulnerable to you.
mhm,
But I would just be mindful that moral injury can cause self-hatred. It can make them angry for having done something which they really didn't want to. And
mm,
they don't want to identify as that, which you'll hear many veterans say, "I don't want to think about that. I don't want to talk about that." They want to separate themselves from that life.
mm,
But was it for like but it was for survival purposes, right, Max? Like they were put in the
Abs-
middle of it and they're like, I have to get out of this.
mm,
yes, that's the tough part. They volunteered. Once you sign that piece of paper, you are property of the government.
mm,
And so if they don't do what they're told, then they end up being dishonorably discharged, which impacts their entire life. And it
mm,
can. So the recourse
Or going
also, it's not
AWOL.
just that. It's not just that. But if your brother or sister in arms life is in danger because someone has a gun, they're about to shoot them,
mm,
you're going to protect the people that are closest to you. That's evolution. It's not going to negate the fact that you might have had to kill a child, or you might have had to do something that goes against your moral beliefs.
mhm.
So the
Yeah,
So that's where
trauma
yeah,
absolutely
the
trauma.
trauma comes from the guilt and the shame as well.
that's part of
Yeah,
PTSD, guilt and shame,
right. Mhm.
severe.
So
Um,
does the PTSD have a direct or indirect correlation to the um, substance abuse and dependence as a form of coping?
Mary?
well, yeah. The substance abuse. Substance abuse is kind of like a self medication, that people often use, and it's a quick fix, and of course, in our mental health field, there is co-occurring disorder, which means that it's mental health and co-occurring with substance abuse as well. We usually rule out the you know this, SP, that you, yeah, and all, Max, as well, like we rule out the substance before we look into the mental health part of things. A lot of people have said that they turn to substance because it's easier, like you quick fix, you feel good, at the moment. But then the backdrop of that though is that you're gonna feel very terrible the next day, and sometimes people end up in the lock psych unit, after they drank a lot of alcohol, and they said, wait, what just happened? I just had a party, and then now I'm in the lock psych unit, right? Those are more extreme examples. We always say, like, when it comes to like PTSD, or going through a very let's say crisis and grief situation, we always tell people to stay away from alcohol, drugs, right? Coffee and tea as well, because it causes like heart palpitation, like jumpiness and things like that. But alcohol for sure, and drugs, because at the moment that's not going to be helpful, especially when you're vulnerable. Yeah, and with veterans, SB, I just want to add with the veterans, I re- thank you so much, Max, for bringing that up with about the veterans, where a big thing that comes into my mind is bearing witness, like really bearing witness to them of what they went through, and then why they're even, why that beer means so much to them, like because it really helps them to kind of like suppress and avoid, or kind of like just push it down. And so, with the veterans, we always say, like, I mean, at least what I've learned is that we have to really bear witness to where they come from, what they've been through, what it was like. Even now, like if they're running outside their backyard and have to hide, it's because they're really experiencing that trauma from the past, a flashback from the past, and we really have to believe it. And Neville, you mentioned about dismissing, like making sure that we don't dismiss something, and this is so important, that sometimes we don't even know that we're dismissing something by not acknowledging their experiences versus just blocking it out, as though, like when I said being very positive, like so there's a fine line between like being positive but also validating and normalizing and accepting that that was reality, that is reality, and what to do moving forward as
And bearing
allyship
witness.
together. Bearing witness, absolutely, yeah.
Let's kind of talk about the pandemic. How has the pandemic affected the rate of trauma and the severity of it overall? Like the divorce rates, domestic violence, childhood abuse, spousal abuse, neglect, financial strain.
Mm,
Homelessness,
yeah.
crime rates. Yes,
Yeah.
5 minutes, Mary.
Yeah.
Max, 5 minutes. Figure it out.
Max,
It's
you.
definitely impacted everything. And one group that I forgot to mention was that with the isolation or quarantine, whichever term you want to use, people that were
Yes.
incarcerated, the people that have been living with a 6 by 6 cell, now they're told you're out, and suddenly you're locked up again. So that's going to cause a lot of trauma. When the pandemic came out about 2 years ago, they said there was a 40% uptake in divorce rates. So that means that that's going to be traumatic for the children, if there are any. The fact that people are so closed in with each other's space, boundaries are difficult. There's difficulty separating work from home. Am I home? Am I at work? So self-care is much more difficult. So you had an increase of substance use for coping. Because substance use, in the sense of mental health, I like to think of it as this is how they've learned to survive. This is how they've learned to regulate their psyche so they don't either hurt themselves or hurt other people. But because of the pandemic and everything that's been caused by it, it's traumatic for anybody.
Hmm.
The
Absolutely,
rates of
Max.
alcohol have gone up. I'm sorry, Mary. Rate of alcohol use went up tremendously. It's sad to say, but the alcohol, like all the little liquor stores and stuff, they got the stimulus package, they got the PPP, and their business went up. Then they were allowed to deliver. I'm not hey, no offense to anybody out here that owns a store, has family, but then they were able to do Uber and all the apps, and I mean, they made money hand over fist. You know what I mean? During this pandemic here, I have
Hmm.
no idea why I brought that up, but I just felt like bringing it up. Oh, and the remote learning too. The remote learning with the children added to stress as well, with parenting skills and all this other stuff. People didn't realize how much weight school after school programs they did not realize how much of a burden it is to take on. They lack certain skills and coping
Mhm.
mechanisms, and that
Mhm.
played a part too.
Maybe they'll
Right.
respect teachers more now and pay
Yeah,
teachers better.
exactly. You
Oh,
know how that argument's going on for decades. Let's see.
yeah. No, absolutely. I think in terms of like the trauma, with COVID, like and all the things that happen, external factors from it. There's so many. You mentioned domestic violence, children being abused, things like that. It's been very heightened, given the fact that people are home, like Max had mentioned. When they're home, kids, they need to be out too. They need to have space, and I recently heard someone say that like the kids seem so happier now. Like a staff at school say that the kids are so much happier now. Wonder what happened. So they were able to take off the mask, so they were able to be free. So there was freedom, like with taking off the mask. There's freedom with being outside, freedom with not locked in, and especially in New York, it's smaller space, right? Where there's no space. I mean, it's hard. You're in the same place, you're in the same apartment, and I know couples who work together, there's no room. One has to be in the bathroom, the other one has to be in the other room, or they're constantly on each other's edge, sort of not able to have their own self care. So that causes a lot of friction as well. Yeah, and also jobs. Some people couldn't go to work because their children had to be home. So it was a ripple effect, catch 22 with a lot of situation. So absolutely a great impact in every which way. And I, yeah, just can't can't grasp on how many things has happened for the past 2 years of offline. Max and Neville, we were just chatting on how much things. I mean, it's like everything within these 2 years, which can be a terrible thing. And then on the opposite side, as I always like to say, looking from a different perspective, that now we really learn to appreciate our own life so much more now than we ever did before, and maybe we can learn to appreciate others just as much, given all that we went through as a collective whole. Yeah.
Max, I have a question, specifically for you because of the area that you work in. Um, I am a person who has lived in Texas all of my life. Um, I had we have a certain relationship with with police officers.
Mhm.
Um, even so far as my house was broken into and I just cleaned up the mess. I didn't even bother to call the police. Um, so there's often a difficulty having empathy when it comes to police officers and trauma. Can you give me some insight on, especially because of this pandemic, on some of the issues that our police forces are facing at this time that are affecting their mental health?
Well, because of the uptake of crime and just violence overall, you remember the looting that happened, I forget, for like a week. That's stretching the police thin. So not only do they have more people having to go for longer hours, that's impacting their ability to stay at home and take care of themselves. They're having to do overtime. They're getting more exposed to longer shifts, more violence, more emotional dysregulation. So that is going to cause them to engage in survival instinct of numbing. Numbing is one of the most common ways people in law enforcement or military deal. They either deal with substance use, numbing, or both. And so what's going to happen is the numbing factor simply makes it difficult to emotionally connect, and it'll become more automatic. They're trying to have police officers engage in activities of self-care. They're having them go encourage counseling. We're still breaking that glass ceiling of getting access to mental health no longer being a stigma. But until that happens, you're going to notice that the pandemic has burned everybody out, including the police. So not only are they doing what they used to do, now they're being asked to do more. You've heard about them being mandated to take the vaccine. You've heard that a lot of them got suspended for that. So now it's even your army has been become more thin. Your troops are spread so thin now, they have more people or less people doing more. Something's going to give. And thinking of them as a human being, there's only so much we can ask any human being to do. So it is normal for anybody to suddenly kind of numb out. Otherwise, they're going to become susceptible to the same traumas or worse. I don't know if that was answering your question.
Yes. Yes, it was.
I wanted to ask. Wait, sorry, Mary. I wanted to ask you because you were dealing with that in the beginning. I think I don't know if you are now, but you were dealing with first responders, and so it was firemen, EMS. I guess same kind of question with those people. How are they? How did they cope?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know I was, I mean, with the first responder, that was a very important people to me. I know, Neville, we laughed about that, that I went face to face with the first responder during COVID, because, I just felt that they really needed the support and really needed the care. I think a lot of them, how they dealt with it. Let's say, with the, let's say the, the police officers. I know, as emergency grief counselor, that there are supports there. There are grief counselors that go to some of the police station, like some of them, and I mean, there are more heightened support that are, going to different areas to support them in whatever they're going through, and to kind of like, is it like break the barrier, like, you asked me this question, SP, on the stigma of mental health in Asian community. There's also, would there be like sort of like a stigma in the, like, those other hefty field, like police officer, like firemen. They are meant to be the people who save our lives, save the world, save everything. And so sometimes they need a break too. They need some support. The firemen's, they're the one who's picking up all the, seeing all the fire everywhere. And we try to support them as best as we can by helping them to have their own self-care too. I know firemen have very difficult schedules, so we work on different schedules that they can kind of work on when they're home, and just having proper self-care, scheduling vacations when they can, and just similar things. But at the same time, with first responders, is that type of thing, is like, your mode is already like down. I know that going to the hospital, as an emergency grief counselor, it was also very, very interesting. Going to ICU, to the ER, and speaking to people who are, they probably, they know they're very strong, and they got this. And what would us as grief counselor really do to support them, right? And I think the biggest thing is that we are there, and we bear witness, and we understand, and we're with you, and we got you, and we're bringing you to, really know that this is temporary, not permanent. But I know this was a long temporary, um seems so permanent. I got that. Yeah, yeah. I think, SP, were you saying something?
I was just agreeing with you because, you know, I don't think most people understand that while the rest of the world stopped, we didn't. Uh,
Right.
we
Got
weren't
it.
we don't have that. We didn't have the luxury of or um
Means, or
the me well actually we
nothing.
just couldn't stay at home because between
And the privilege.
the people getting COVID, and we're taking care of the people who have COVID, and then we're getting COVID, and now our resources have lessened, and but we still have a hospital full of COVID patients, and most devastating thing was when the morgues got full and you're not able to treat people, especially as a hospice nurse, with the love and care that you're used to providing, and they're just bagged and put into a trailer.
Mm.
So even seeing that is something that I don't think a lot of people really understand the emotional toll that it takes when you're doing this day after day. And it wasn't 2 or 3 deaths, it was 10 to 15 deaths just during your shift.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
sometimes your shift was 8 hours, most often it was 16 hours. And most times we just slept there because somebody else would get sick and then we just have to get up and go again.
Mm.
So I don't think people really understood exactly what the first responders were kind of going through. Um they couldn't picture it because unless you do it, you don't understand it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think so a lot of the doctors or the nurse were saying that it was what was it? It's kind of like a like not a movie, like a movie. It's like a nightmare movie, or I
A
forgot the exact.
never-ending nightmare.
Yeah, yeah, never
Yeah, they
ending
couldn't
nightmare.
wake
Like,
up from. They're like, "This is a dream. I can't wake up from. I'm in a nightmare."
right, and the amount of bodies like here and there, like in one, like you
I think
said,
it
in
starts to
one night.
become numbing. I think after a
Yeah,
while you start to become numb to it too,
right.
and disassociate, which is scary, but you do. I think that's a coping mechanism with everything.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. There was something I was gonna say about like the first responders and stuff. Like I think that even us as clinicians, we have a certain level of privilege of doing it virtually, X, Y, and Z, right? But I think when you're first responders or frontline worker, like SP saying, I think that one, they're not given the permission to take a break, and then two, because many of them are so dedicated, I don't think they even give themselves the permission where it's like, I'm gonna keep going and fight this. And I wonder, like, if you two have anything to say to those. I mean, we're kind of over that now, but anything you want to say to them who have, like, they talk about long haul COVID, but I think there's long haul trauma from this whole situation. Long haul trauma.
No, Neville, you pointed to a very, very important thing as it relates to people that are in healthcare, especially in crisis or in any protection. Law enforcement, firemen, you know, healthcare providers in the ER crisis settings. That's their life, that's their existence. And how this relates to trauma is because with PTSD, that becomes the way you physically exist, your emotional level, its baseline is automatically heightened. And so for however many years, 10, 20 years of working in that way, once they retire, that's when there's a high chance they could end up committing suicide or fall under severe depression because suddenly you've taken away their entire existence out. So I encourage people in these settings, find hobbies, find ways to engage in self-care. Have a fallback plan for your life, if you will. Once your current sense of existence is gone, once you're no longer dealing with crises, once you're no longer having that race, the adrenaline, if you will, what's there? What's the point? And by having something to enjoy, to find things that make you feel good, self-care, I can't repeat it enough, that's going to help you with the transition once they retire to be able to have the quality of life they've wanted to have. They went into this field to promote well-being, but also feel joy. And if people don't do that, if they don't have something to go home to, then that's going to cause some severe risk of self-harm, suicide, depression.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Max. Yeah. To piggyback on what Max said, I think during this time, it was definitely a difficult time for everyone, but more, especially the first responders, where many of them, they had to go home and sleep in different rooms. And then not only are they working face to face when everyone's home, they had to also be in different room away from their family. They had to stay in the basement, or when they come home, they have to take off all their gears and gowns and everything and throw it in the washer. And everything was an extra step, that you're in these outfits that are like very hefty. And so there's a definitely an extra layer of that. I think a lot of them, it's a very tough one, because not only are they experiencing this, but their family are experiencing, oh my goodness, what if they are, what if something happens to my mother while she's being doing her job over there. What am I going to do? So they spend more time talking to their children to, like, calm them down. And then who's calming me down, like, like the person who's working in the hospital. So there's a lot of multitude of things. And sometimes in the grieving world, it's about, we come together with reality base, knowing that, yes, mommy has to go work. And that, like, I know it's tough. And it's gonna be okay. But if we say it's gonna be okay, then you're dismissing something, because it's not really that okay out there, right? So we sometimes have to put in the inspiration that every day we're gonna have some great time. And we take a walk outside. I think that was a big deal, to take a walk in the corner with your family when you can. Doing little things like that what was how some of them coped with it. But as a collective whole, they were talking a lot. They had groups, and they had support groups, and especially they had a lot of emergency grief counselors around. So that could be helpful. Just having everyone's collective support, and everyone knowing that we're all in this together. It's not and I got your back. There's a lot of hands helping other people. And just more gratitude in life. I think gratitude is a big deal. That thinking about the positive ways that we want to think positively, that we have to be grateful for everything that we have in life. Saying 3 things that you're grateful for each night, right? Writing in the journal things that you envision for the day. Not doing the typical 21 things you normally can do. Maybe you could only do 15 today, and that's quite all right. But maybe say the 3 things that you're definitely going to do in the morning when you brush your teeth. Because like, I'm definitely going to do the laundry, definitely going to write that email, definitely going to cook that dinner, so that you're not so hard on yourself. But one thing we always tell everyone is that during this time, you're not normal these days, right? It comes off as a joke, but what that really means is that I'm here to write a permission slip to give to you, to be however and whatever you need to be during this difficult time. And that really supports them. And a lot would say thank you. Thank you so much, because I really needed to hear that I have permission, that I'm not it's not me. It's just something that's not normal.
It's okay not to be okay.
Right.
Can you be human? You don't
Mm-hmm.
need to be Ubermensch. Can you acknowledge? Would you give the permission to your neighbor to have these experiences? If so, they're human, you're human. So can you give yourself as a human the same permission?
What do you always say, Max? Like, how would you talk to your best friend or your?
How would you talk to anybody if you're so critical of yourself and so judgmental? Because we can be our own worst critics. Think about your friend, your partner, your family. What would you, what type of support would you give to them? And the compassion, the love, the forgiveness that you would give them, give that to yourself, because you are human too. And if we can start with ourselves, forgiving ourselves and embracing, appreciating ourselves, then it becomes easier to do it with others. But if we reject who we are, causing that dissonance, it's going to be very difficult to coexist in the world. So
Mary,
Um,
Mary, why you bugging?
so
Just bugging.
the name of the show is Powerful Impact. Who were the three most influential people who provided a powerful impact in your lives, either personally or professionally?
Mhm. Got
or
it.
miscellaneous?
I got it. Yeah. Max, you want to go first?
I'll let you go first, Mary.
Okay. Aw,
She wants
okay.
you to go first,
You-
Max.
no, no, okay, that's okay. I can go, and then put on the side.
I'll
Not
go
a
first. I'll go first.
okay.
Please do.
Me, okay,
I'm
yeah.
joking, man. I'm joking. Go ahead.
Okay. So three powerful, the three powerful people in my life. The number one out of all things would be grandma, of course, my
Mhm.
maternal grandma. She was a matriarch, like a very strong woman. Mother Teresa, I call her. Every time she walks around the community, she's like a president in the community. Everyone says hi to her, always smiling. And we always hear that grandma rules are the best, and they really are the best. And she really provided that space where no matter what happens, it's all good. And like to really be grateful for what you got, and to really be supportive of others, so that you what comes around goes around. But the biggest thing that she had was that she always smiled, like always smiled till the very end, and never any problem. Everything is all good. And I truly believe that I like I want to be a copy of her, to really bring to the community, like with smiles, that you can just be this be who you be. When we say like it's about who you be, not what you do or what you have. It's about your being as a person. She exuded this being. So yeah, grandma is the best. The best of the best. Let me see. The other two would the other two, well, I think I do want to put my father and my mother, of course, because they are the ones who you know brought me to life, right? And I know that like at many families, we have a lot of like powerful impact, right? Like like your show, but where we
Ooh.
we go through a lot of difficulties in life, but breakdowns are always breakthroughs. I always believe that the breakdown will always be breakthrough. So although like with my father, I always said that he is the person who really exuded a no fear attitude in my life. And what that means is that no matter what happened, where he was, what he was, he will get his work done. Like he has went through many different jobs, lines of jobs at restaurants, postal services, like a taxi driver, whatever, printing press, whatever you can do, in gun points, in all points of life. And he's all good, and he just keeps going and keeps moving. So he really exuded a no fear attitude of my life. My grandma exuded that gratefulness, gratitude, happiness, authenticity, sincerity. My mother, she brought me to life too. And my mother is that type of person who worked really hard, persevered and really kept going, no matter what was in her face. No matter who was, in which way, whatever way, to her it didn't matter. And in somewhat ways it would kind of be like, I gotta like just take it in and just breathe it out. But at the same time, what was so great about her is that she didn't let anyone or anything get in the way. She still got her job done, And so those are the three people who I really kept going with, and working hard, and just doing what we gotta do for our own people and people at large. Yeah, Max.
So, you know, I have to say my mother and father, because they adopted someone from a different culture to their country, and they kind of help people realize the definition of family isn't blood, it's for people who love, who care, and who are willing to advocate on your behalf. So I could have ended up just being someone on disability living in a group home. Yet they wanted and they were willing to fight for me to have better, to have more, and push me to that end. Say, no, we're not going to let you settle. We want you to experience a full life. So they're still doing it. They're still encouraging me, which is wonderful. And I would have to say the third person is my godmother, who I consider my second mother. She's been there as an advocate during one of my surgeries. The doctor was saying, "Oh, let's just do this," but she stepped in and said, "No, no, no, we're going to be more methodical." And instead of having brain surgery haphazardly, she made sure that it was really taken care of well. So those are the three people that have always had my back. Anytime that I've had questions, anytime I needed something growing up, they've always been willing to support my goals. So without them, you know, it would not have happened. Neville.
Man behind the blue wall.
So, what would you like your when it's all said and done, and what would you like your legacy to be?
Yeah, legacy. Yeah, yeah. My legacy, really awesome. When I think of legacy, it's like a really, like I always want to put give a legacy, obviously, to my children, right, and to life. First, we want to be really realistic that we want to do it for ourselves, our own. Family first, and then like really having them all equipped and everything with life, and that it's all about being happy, and to build up on life. And then of course that would actually be the same thing we model outside of life, right? Because we have to be really true clinicians, not kind of like a fake clinician, or it has to be authentic, it has to be true to self. So whatever I want for my own family, I would probably want for the community that I'm I serve, and for them to know that life, life is that type of thing. Is like, it's very precious. Life is short, and we got to be real. I mean, I have to be real with that we don't have life forever, and death is inevitable. And every time if we say death, it's very sad. But remember, in hospice, as you know, SP is a very beautiful thing. Now, if you had a beautiful life and you have peace in your heart at the very end stages of life, you'll have a beautiful life. So I think it's all about your own completion, about what is important to you. So I think for me, my message is always that you know for people to really bring happiness. It's not about you being a you know um, you know uh, you better be a doctor when you grow up, or you better be this when you do, or whatnot. It's really, you better be happy when you grow up. But it's not that you better be happy but you can't be sad, not like that. But really about like like really the legacy of life is like grandma's, what my grandma taught me is to really live life to the fullest, to the fullest extent of whatever you had. If you had less in the past, it's all good, because then that's, you're going to learn to appreciate that even more. Now that you have it, you won't take it for granted. And the legacy would look like, no matter what, there's always possibility to everything and anything. And that's why this thinking sometimes is like very like not everything is possible. But at the same time, if you really look at it, everything is really possible. But perhaps there's a little tweaks here and there, but it's still possible. So my legacy would really look like, for everyone, my family first, it would be real, that we want everyone to just be happy and just really live life, a life that is meaningful for them, and then contribute to others and make a difference in the world, because that we're social beings, we're human beings, and we need to serve and make a difference. And that's what will give us the best, the most strength in our heart, I believe. Yeah. Go ahead now.
I like that, Mary. I do. I make a joke of this, but I'd like to just be seen as that enigma. Oh, who was this guy? He made me realize this. just know I can change people. But in reality, if I were to leave any legacy, it would be that I helped break the stigma and barriers of people recognizing that mental health and mental illness, it's not a weakness. It's actually harder to overcome something so abstract, and to have people accept that this is part of who we are, and we can either fight ourselves or we can embrace ourselves and become whole. So if I can at least help people recognize the change of mental illness becoming an illness to emotional growth and healing, so we change the way we see certain treatments ourselves, that would be my ideal. Break down the walls, the way we label each other, the fact that we even have borders. If we can stop categorizing one another, then we don't need that. We all work for the common good. But I'll stick with maybe helping with reducing the stigma of mental health.
So, lastly, do you have any shout outs or projects that you'd like to highlight?
I do. There is
Mo-
a group called Victory for Veterans, and they have a Warriors for Life, which is an online peer support group. This is run by Colonel Burrows, and he is amazing as he works with this nonprofit organization that helps veterans, whether it's through emotional resources, whether it's helping them rebuild their lives. So anybody who is a veteran, it's victoryforveterans.org. They've actually created a project down in Costa Rica to help veterans suffering from PTSD, TBI, MST, and other invisible wounds like um, moral, injury. So I do encourage that anybody who's listening who is a veteran or knows someone who's a veteran that could benefit from support to, check them out. They're free and they're an amazing group.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. As far as different groups, I do know that I Hollaback training. They do provide defensive training to kind of help the community to kind of fight off the Asian hate and just kind of be ready. And I thought that that was a really like a bystander intervention trainings. They have a lot of free services there on iHollaback.org, and I find them very helpful. I know that within New York, there's the Asian, I mean the NYC Life Wellness, who always provide like 24-hour hotline for anyone who needs like help with mental illness. There used to be a Asian Life Net. That was also very helpful for crises, and it could just be like you're looking for a therapist or whatnot. They can also help you. So I think those are something to really have. Also, the New York Coalition for Asian American Mental Health. They're really great. They're the advocacy for Asian mental health, the umbrella of all Asian mental health, and they really bring about a lot of support to the mental health community. So anything with mental health, and since I'm talking about like a lot of the Asian stuff, there's also the Asian collective, mental health collective. They have a listing of all Asian social workers in all different states, like in any state that you have or that you're at, and they can be also supportive with a lot of events and things that are happening in the world. So yeah, those can be great shout outs.
I just I just want to thank both of you for coming on. This has been such a great conversation. Um, I believe in building bridges and not walls, and this has just been delightful. I'll put all of the links. I'll put all of the links that y'all just gave us. I'll put them in the description, and that way it'll be easy for anybody who wants to reach out in in order to get help. You will have those links available to you. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment. Um, I
Hit the
read every
notification
comment.
bell.
Push
I
notifications.
Yeah, hit the notification bell.
hit the
You get the latest.
notification
You
bell.
get the latest in
Yeah, so you can catch up
latest
on the latest
episodes and updates.
episodes. Powerful impact. It's more than music. This is life, and I want everyone to live it to the fullness, to the fullest of their capabilities. Um, just thank you guys so much. This was so wonderful. I really appreciate you both.
Of course, SP, I appreciate you giving us a platform to convey the message, to reach a wider audience, because we could use this tool for something small, or we can use what you're doing for something big for the whole community. So I
Hmm.
appreciate you doing that. Neville, awesome. I appreciate you bringing us together for this.
Yeah,
Definitely, man. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate this. Mary, Max, appreciate you too. SP, appreciate you always. Thank you for
yeah.
everything.
Yeah, thank you, SP, for hosting all this, and like really, you're so natural, so lovely. Like thank you for the great questions. I think it is a real great conversation that is not really out there. So I really appreciate this opportunity, and yeah, and Neville for bringing us together. I know Neville and Max, they're my cool buddies, and I really enjoy having this conversation together with them. So. Thank you guys.
This has been awesome. Um, Neville,
Hey, now we have made a powerful impact here. They have made a powerful impact there. You go make a powerful impact anywhere you be. Because, like Mary and Max said, it's human being. So keep being. Don't worry about doing, but you do need to do a little doing, but be more being, all right? They don't know who we be. All right, I'm out. Powerful impact. Boom.
Bye.
all right, we're out.
Thank you.
Peace.
Have a good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Take care.